Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review. And today I'm going to take a look at the Howard the Duck Omnibus. Now, this is a book that I feel like is maybe a little bit underappreciated, or certainly goes under the radar a bit anyway. I don't see it being discussed online very often at all. But when I first read this book a few years ago, I had a great time. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, in all honesty. And I've reread it since, and it's entertained me just as much. So today I want to showcase it, kind of flick through it, hopefully give you an idea of what it's like if you yourself haven't checked this out before. But I really think that even though this is one of those kind of niche characters who maybe doesn't have much appeal, you know, certainly in comparison to other Marvel mainstays, I think this is an entertaining read that's well worth reading. Let's take a look though. So this dust jacket here is the standard cover, I think, when it first came out, and I think this is a second printing, this one. But this is Frank Brunner artwork on the cover, featuring Howard, his on-again, off-again girlfriend Beverly, who is pretty much the main supporting character throughout this run, and also the Man-Thing there lurking in the background, who is tied to Howard in that he first appeared in an issue of Man-Thing, or an issue of Adventures into Fear, starring Man-Thing anyway. Got your main creators here. So Steve Gerber, really the main creator of the character, the main writer, and then artists Gene Colan, Val Mayrick, and Frank Brunner, of course, who I've already mentioned. We've got the cover gallery on the back, usual kind of thing for the classic Silver Bronze Age era omnibuses. And then you get your material down there at the bottom. So you get a few issues starring Man-Thing, where Howard first appeared, before getting his own series, and you get the whole 33 issues of that in here, plus an annual and a couple of other things. On the book itself, we get that same cover by Frank Brunner under here, and I think this is a really cool cover, looks really nice. Same spine, and this was actually the DM variant cover. Never really liked that one quite as much, don't really like the hyper-realistic style of the artwork, but you know, it's alright. Inside the book then, and we'll just take a look and go through this. So I'll give a spoiler warning, you know, just because I'm going to show this off in a fair amount of detail, so if you've never seen it before and you don't want anything spoiled, yeah, fair warning. But this is a really kind of fun series. It's such a wild and wacky and weird series at times. You know, Gerber made some deliberate efforts to really immerse the plots into this kind of weird realm of just crazy stuff happening. But here we go then on the contents. We've got the full list of everything in here. So the first few issues are Man-Thing related, as they were the first time we saw Howard in comics. And then he spun off quickly into his own series as he proved quite popular. And that lasted for technically 33 issues, but it's a bit weird because the final couple of issues were printed a long time after the series had sort of ended before then. So, you know, if we look, Howard the Duck issue 30, March 1979, yeah, 31, May 79, and then a 7-year gap for Howard the Duck 32 coming out in January 86. And really that series was over at that point because Steve Gerber had left years ago. He'd been pretty much edged out. And honestly, I don't think this series or this character was ever the same again when other people wrote it after him. And speaking of Gerber, this is a really kind of touching introduction here. This was written by him, as he mentions in here. He was actually writing it in or from his hospital room. At this point in time, Gerber was very ill. He knew this book was going to be printed, this omnibus specifically, so this whole introduction is really about him looking back on his time, creating Howard, writing this original series, and expressing his very pleasant, happy surprise that this run is getting this omnibus treatment, this deluxe treatment. But the sadness of it is that very shortly after he wrote this, Steve Gerber actually passed away, I think only a few weeks after the date on here, which is 16th January 2008. So obviously very sad, but I suppose at least in his final days, he was aware that probably his favourite creation was getting this special deluxe treatment. Some small comfort in that, I suppose. But as we dive into it, we start off here then in the material with Adventure into Fear, issue 19, featuring the Man-Thing. And, you know, the Man-Thing is, I don't know, a character that never really appealed to me. You know, I just think he's a very generic kind of monster character and never really caught my attention too much. But this panel here, this almost throwaway panel is where Howard the Duck first appears. He just kind of walks past the characters. And that was going to be his whole thing. And that was going to be all there ever was to Howard the Duck. But Gerber decided to bring him back and make a bit more of the character in these subsequent issues. And I think, surprisingly to everybody, fan response to this quirky duck character was very positive. So before long, he was starring in his own series, you know, as we obviously see for the bulk of this omnibus. This first couple of issues here, this is from Giant Size Man Thing, which is one of those hilarious comic book titles. And it sees him on Earth for the first time, stranded on Earth, and nobody believes that he's a duck. Nobody understands how, and when they do realise he's a duck, nobody understands why this walking, talking duck is here. One of the main recurring small jokes throughout the whole book, to be honest, is that everybody expresses this incredible shock that they're talking to a duck, and Howard gets more and more kind of bored of it. He's like, yeah, I'm a duck, okay, get over it. And then we get into the main series anyway. So Howard the Duck issue 1. I always really liked this cover. Very kind of sword and sorcery, tongue-in-cheek issue. Obviously things like Conan were at the height of popularity really at this point in the mid-70s. So we've got Beverly here, the character dressed as Red Sonja, or at least a very Red Sonja-esque kind of costume. And yeah, it's the whole thing really about this series is, well, there's a few things I suppose, but Gerber really used it as a kind of vehicle to provide a lot of political satire, some social commentary, a lot of just general comedy. And he made comic books themselves the target of the jokes very often in how ridiculous a lot of comic tropes tend to be. And you get a lot of hilarious, ridiculous villains as well, and plots in general as a result of that. So what I will also say though is that this book features just some really fantastic artwork. It's almost like the best of the Bronze Age in a way. The first couple of issues, I think, by Frank Brunner. Ultimately, the main chunk of the pencils end up being done by Gene Colan. And if you've seen my reviews for books that he's featured in before, you know, his work is featured in before, you'll know that I'm a big fan of him. And I think that his work on here is just as excellent as it is on anything else. This is one of those characters I'm talking about though, Turnip Man. He wears this kind of turnip on his head. If I remember rightly, it's like a mind-controlling turnip. There's some absolutely mental plots in here, I'm telling you. It's just ridiculous stuff at times, but that's the whole point. Like here, there is Howard the Duck, he learns Quack Fu, and this whole thing is obviously a master of Kung Fu, Shang-Chi kind of parody. But yeah, there's just so much fun to be had in here. It's really interesting because it's still, you know, you could think something like this that takes things like political satire and puts them at the heart of the comic could easily be dated, given that the series is, well, I suppose coming up on, 50 years old now? And yet a lot of it's still relevant. A lot of it's still very amusing. I just think that Gerber did a very unique and interesting thing with this character, and probably a real first for mainstream comics, certainly from Marvel. I don't think there'd been a series anything like this really up until this point, that was willing to poke fun at some genuine, serious issues, and also just at the comics medium itself, as I mentioned. At this point, we've got Gene Colan on art, and I just think that such a fantastic art style that that Colan had. He paints with a pencil. Honestly, that's how it seems like. Panels like these, honestly, almost looks painted. It's crazy how skilled the guy was. But yeah, so I'm just remembering some of these things as I'm flicking through them. So there's this like cookie creature, literally gets baked and comes to life and terrorizes them. what's funny as well during all this, I think, is Howard's reaction to everything. The thing is about Howard is he's not a hero. He doesn't have any superpowers. You know, these crazy things keep happening to him, and he doesn't really have any way of dealing with it beyond what you or I could do. You know, he tries his best sometimes to fight back with whatever objects are lying around, or he just runs away, hides. A lot of the time just makes a lot of sarcastic comments in disbelief at how bizarre it is that these things keep happening to him. I think just a really well written character overall. I think that's the main takeaway that I have from this series. And it's a shame that the character's reputation, I think, was really tarnished, because that awful 80s movie, I think everybody is aware of. If you've not seen it, you're probably aware of it, because it's infamously bad, at least to most people. I think it is. But I think that because of it, nevertheless, to this day, I think a lot of people instinctively think of that movie and that version of Howard when they think of Howard the Duck. But that's really not the character as originally created and envisioned by Steve Gerber. You know, when I first picked this book up, I thought it could be something awful, because that movie was basically all I really had in terms of my awareness of this character. So I was incredibly surprised to read this book and find out that it's an intelligent, well-written, sophisticated series that tackles a lot of mature themes and has a lot of genuinely funny comedy inserted frequently throughout. It's something that I think is a bit of a dark horse, not to be confused with the other publisher, but just a book that I think is unfairly maybe dismissed by people who don't really know about it, and something, like I say, I myself was quite guilty of until I finally gave it a chance. Because people maybe don't know what to expect from this series. But it's just really good, and hopefully you agree, or at least understand my point as I flick through here, as to how nice some of this artwork really looks. There's also an issue in here which I should be able to find, which is probably one of the most unique comics ever made. Not only a very unique comic in the Howard the Duck series, which was in itself a unique series, but just a very interesting issue in general that we're coming up to now. I think it's issue 16, and I believe the title is Zen and the Art of Comic Book Writing. But not before we have an annual here. So for this annual, Val Myrick returned as artist. He having been the co-creator of the character, the first artist to draw him. And it's this kind of Arabian Nights kind of story. I think, without even really talking too much about it, if you take a look at just some of the stuff going on in these panels, I think it speaks for itself, really, how just crazy this book can be sometimes. But this is the introduction, I think, of the character Dr. Bong, who has a giant bell on his head. Gene Colan art, Klaus Janson inking here. And I think Klaus Janson has a very unique inking style, and immediately this is, even though it's Colan penciling it, this is quite immediately reminiscent of his run with Frank Miller on Daredevil, from just the artwork, I mean. Okay, yeah, so this is the issue, issue 16, and what basically happened here was Steve Gerber missed a deadline, pretty much, if I remember rightly, and had to come up with something, let's say, very different. So only this first page is an actual kind of typical comic page. And what then happens is we get a series of pages where it's effectively like an illustrated essay where Gerber writes about what it's like to be a comic book writer and the many different things that he takes into account when he does this job. And it's a really interesting read with a different artist working on every page. And I just think it stands out to me as one of those super unique comics, kind of like the Snowblind issue of Alpha Flight with the pages of white that John Byrne drew with the fight in the snowstorm. I don't know, this is one of those issues like that one that is just kind of always memorable to me. I think it ends as well with an apology. I think Steve Gerber ends up saying, you know, sorry about this. I promise we'll be back to normal, like an actual comic, as of next issue. And yeah, so as of the next issue, the story then continues. Yeah, really fun time, this book. I really think it's well worth checking out. I think I've probably said that I don't know how many times now. If not on the Omnibus, because like I say, I think this is out of print. Here's a great Spider-Man No More reference. A foul no more. Yeah, if you can't get the Omnibus, as I say, I don't know how hard this is to track down now, how expensive it is. But obviously you can read it digitally, if nothing else. And I think there's trade paperback collections of it as well. An interesting thing that ended up happening, quite ironically in retrospect, is that once this character started to gain more popularity, Disney took note of him and decided that Howard bears too much of a resemblance to Donald Duck. So they wanted the character to be, well, the agreement that was reached is Disney wanted this character to be changed to resemble Donald the Duck less. And so Marvel's editors agreed that they would put more clothes on him. So he starts wearing trousers here. Gerber did not like that. He didn't want his character to be changed. He didn't think that interference from some other company should dictate how he should write this character or how this character should be depicted. So at the end of this issue, Gerber literally has these trousers rip off and then doesn't have him wear them again. So he literally defied the Marvel editors. In having this character drawn this way, he insisted that this be the case. And that really was one of a few things that ended up causing tension between him and the higher-ups at Marvel, which ultimately resulted in him being kicked off this series and started quite a long-running saga of Steve Gerber trying to gain the character rights for Howard back in what was ultimately an unsuccessful lawsuit. Now, all that real-life stuff kind of taints the fun time that is had in this comic, but I think it's always interesting to know about, you know, the behind-the-scenes stuff surrounding the material. And at the end of the day, this was a character that Steve Gerber was very passionate about, and I think that is reflected in this series. I think he very clearly enjoyed writing this book, and that is apparent in how good it is, because I think, you know, very often if you put a lot of passion and effort into something, it's going to come out pretty good, especially if you're talented at something like Steve Gerber was as a writer. But yeah, ultimately, you know, he did not successfully get the character rights back. I think that's known, but he definitely tried, and it was one of a few cases over the years of creators trying, albeit in vain, to try and get their characters from Marvel or DC. The last few issues that are collected in here, though, are after Steve Gerber left the book, and quite honestly, not to be too harsh on them, but you can just stop reading. Once you get to Steve Gerber's final issue, which I think is 27 or 28, the issues after that are completely different, and the art style changes totally as well. And basically Howard the Duck, I feel, just got diluted down. He was quite an edgy character, you know. I feel like this book probably pushed the boundaries a little bit of what you could get away with saying or showing in a mainstream comic book at the time. And all that kind of edginess just got sucked out of the book as soon as Gerber wasn't writing it anymore, and like Marvel editors had full control of it again. Let's see, so issue 28, pretty sure this is Gerber's last. Yeah, so now Marv Wolfman has come in to plot Carmine Infantino, who was a good artist. You know, I think he was primarily a Silver Age DC artist. At least I think that's where a lot of his work is best known from. But it just changes this book completely, and Howard himself ends up being drawn like much more of a cartoon character. I think ironically, again, a lot of irony here, he ends up looking more like Donald Duck than he did before, when Disney thought he looked too much like Donald Duck. And all that, of course, is quite hilarious now, given that Disney has since bought Marvel and owns all this stuff anyway. But, yeah, so these are the issues at the end where, honestly, I don't even think I read all of these because it was just kind of sad to see this character change so quickly for the worse, just with one writer leaving the book, which is why I really think that this is the best example of a character being best understood by the original writer, and nobody having quite captured that magic ever since. But that is just my opinion, of course, and if you disagree with me on that, let me know how you feel about post-Gerber Howard the Duck. Always happy to hear your thoughts. Just want to get to the final issue in here where there's just this really different art style. I think it's this one. No, I don't know. Can't remember. I just know that there were some pages where it just, yeah. I mean, it does. Even though this is Val Myrick drawing it here, it still just doesn't quite look the same. It becomes, like I say, it's lost its edge. Lost its edge and lost its appeal, really, in my opinion. But the vast majority of the book, obviously, is the stuff that Gerber wrote. So despite having a little bit of an anticlimactic ending, this omnibus in particular, I think that the book as a whole is really, really good. And something that I definitely recommend reading overall. I think the Steve Gerber run of Howard the Duck is up there with some truly great all-time runs. And in the back here we've got some extras, so some covers, some interviews, etc. There's the original pencils for the omnibus cover by Frank Brunner, that's really cool. The Frank Cho piece of artwork there. And nice little tribute image at the very end here, Steve Gerber. Yeah, very sad that he didn't really, I don't think he saw this book in print, unfortunately. I'm sure he would have loved to. But yeah, there we go then. That's the Howard the Duck Omnibus. And hopefully that was of some interest. Thank you very much for watching this, if you've stuck with it all the way through. And as I said, let me know what you think about this series, because this really isn't one that I see get discussed often at all, as I said at the beginning. And yeah, it'd be something I'd like to hear more people's thoughts on. So do let me know what your opinions are on this, whether you agree with me that it's really good for the Steve Gerber material, or you don't think so. Really, yeah, just share your thoughts on any of it, to be honest, anything that I've said. But again, thanks as always for watching, I always appreciate the support, and I'll be back again soon with another video.